We're talking today with Ken Ball of Byron Center, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Ken, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Where and when were you born, for instance?
I was born and raised right here in Byron Township. In fact, as a crow flies, probably within 2 miles of here.
All right. And what did your family do?
My family were dairy farmers, and I was born and raised on that farm. The farm is a centennial farm. My nephew now lives on the farm, what's left of it. Mm-hmm. And from there, I went to Byron Center Public School, graduated from there, was very active in sports there, 4-letter man.
And what year did you graduate?
In 1952.
Okay.
And then I went to Grand Rapids Junior College, which now is community college, for a year. Then I went to University of Michigan and was pursuing a degree in architecture. And met my wife, meanwhile, and quit college and came to Grand Rapids and got employed by then J&G Daverman Company, which is now URS Corporation.
And what do they do?
They're architects, engineers. And I was employed in January of 55, and having went to college, I had a 4-year deferment, and sure enough, they caught up with me in November of 56. So I was drafted into the Army. And
what was your reaction to that when you got the draft notice?
Oh, not dramatic, other than the fact being married, he didn't really want to go off somewheres, and hopefully we'd have stayed in the States, but that didn't work out either. But yeah, I had a duty. I pledged that when I signed the papers. So the fact they caught up with me, I thought maybe after the Korean conflict was over with, maybe we wouldn't have to go, but they got us. On the way to Detroit, I met my very close buddy, and we went through basic training in Fort Carson, Colorado.
Describe that facility a little bit. What was Fort Carson like?
Fort Carson, at that time, was in 1956, was just reopened, I think, about a year before. The 9th Infantry Division, I think it was, or battalion, came back from Germany, and they were reassigned at Fort Carson, which reopened and primarily to train Army personnel. And the facility was of the old style.
What does that mean?
Well, wood barracks, 2-story. Just to divert for a moment, my son went to the Air Force Academy. And when we went out there one time to see him, I said, we got to go see the old stomping grounds. Well, I couldn't even find where I lived there. It's changed so much in at that point, 30 years. So.
Right.
But anyway, that's where we had our basic training. My buddy got sick, so he didn't stay with me. Then I went from there to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas.
And I was going to go back again into the basic training part. What do they actually have you do in basic training at that stage?
Oh, all kinds of stuff as far as physical training. Taught us rifle handling, and I ended up being in my division, was the expert first place, I guess you'd call it, in the rifle shooting on a KD range.
Been a hunter or done shooting before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Kentucky windage worked. But, that and physical training and maneuvering and bivouac out in the country to live and stuff.
And how about learning Army discipline?
Oh, yes, definitely.
And how did you adjust to that?
Very well. That was... was not hard for me to do because I was pretty well disciplined by my bringing up as well as in college and stuff like that. So I knew enough when they asked for truck drivers, I didn't volunteer. So.
All right. Now, were you older than most of the guys you were training with?
Yes, probably. I was, I think I was almost 23 at that point. I'm in there, 22, 23. And most of them came in 18, 19 years old. We had a group in our squad, or our, what do you call it? I can't think now, but right across there was a squad of Army Reserve people and National Guard people. Their squad leader was a sergeant even. And then we were across the aisle on them, and then, of course, there's 2 more upstairs. So that was fun. I mean, we had old broke-in guys training with us. So, but the training was strict, of course, Army military, and we learned quite a bit there. And my attitude was I had to go anyway, so I might as well learn as much as I can and do as much as I could. And consequently, I ended up a squad leader and division leader and everything else. So throughout the career. So.
All right, now how long was basic training? How long were you for Carson?
Well, we went in November. Excuse me. We went in November, and then Christmas they let us come home. So we got done basically in early February. It's an 8-week training period, but we took almost 10 weeks to do it, 12 weeks.
Okay, and then where next?
Then we went to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, by Fort Smith, Arkansas. That's what they call advanced basic, and there they do basically the same thing, except you go to school more. In my case, they were training me to be a supply sergeant in radio, which I knew nothing about, but that's what they gave me to do. And I was there for, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, time to get in and out and stuff. My wife came down there and stayed with me during that period of time, so I couldn't stay off base with her, but we met some people from Iowa, and they had the same situation, so the girls lived next door to each other, and that was nice.
Now, was this base another kind of World War II vintage one, or was it a little newer?
It was World War II vintage yet. They may have had some newer facilities. Didn't get a chance to bum around there much because as soon as I had free time, I was off base.
Right. Okay. Now, you said they were training you. Were they training you to be a radio operator? Was that
No, supply sergeant. That means I worked in an office and people need a new tube for the radio, I'd give it to them.
Okay. So you were just supplying stuff for radio people.
That's all I learned at that 8 weeks. I never practiced that MOS ever again. So I did something else.
All right. So then where did you go after that?
Then I was shipped to Korea.
Okay. And how did they get you over there?
Boat. Yeah, and that's a story in itself. We got into Fort Lewis, Seattle, and got delayed. I was there about 2 weeks. But then when we did sail out, go out to Port Sound and get out in the ocean, well, we left on a Sunday afternoon about 3 o'clock. When we woke up the next morning, there was no land around us. We were out to sea. And by 9 o'clock, I was praying that the ship would sink. I was so sick. It was terrible.
What kind of boat were you on?
A troop carrier.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the smallest one in the Pacific Fleet, they said. There's 2 of them. It still was 780-some feet long and I don't know wide, but there was 1,200 troops on it, plus the Marine, not the Marine, but the Mariner crew that runs the ship. So.
Right. Now, were you at this point part of a unit, or were you going out as a replacement?
No, I was going over as to be assigned to somebody over there, which we didn't know at that point. We just were to go into Korea and went to a place called Ascom City, which is inland from Incheon, probably about 10, 12 miles. Mm-hmm. And that's where the hospital was. And then I was assigned to the 8th Army Aircraft Maintenance Division, actually. And was a nomad there, really, because I was technically put over there by the Corps of Engineer. But got into there, and there was 9 of us arrived, all with the same background or MOS to do, supply sergeants, or supply people. 9 of them were really advanced, and the 4 of us were kind of there. So they went back and looked at our career records coming in and placed us in the right spots if they could. Like a fellow from Iowa, he was a machine person, so I put him in the tool and die shop. Mm-hmm. One guy got put from South Dakota, was put into the general supply department. My friend that turned out to be my close friend from Wisconsin was a farm boy, like I was in background, and careered on the farm before he came in. So they put him in this repair and utilities place because he was a handyman, he could do anything. Well, they left me with, where do you go? And I was expecting to get moved. The captain, the head of the division at that point, looked at that and saw that I was an architectural person. He called me in the office and handed me a roll of drawings and said, take a look at this, and out there is a pile of wood. Tell me, it's supposed to be a theater. He says, tell me what you can do with it. And so he says, and meanwhile, pack your stuff up in the repairs and utility place, meet this Corporal Smith, who was head of the repairs and utilities area, and get yourself a bunk and settle in and come back in a week and tell me what you can do with that thing. So that's what I did, first assignment. It was kind of easy. And when I went, and this is a side story of something that's just happened there. I went back to him in a week's time, and I said, I got good news and bad news. He says, well, give me the good news first. I said, I can build you a theater. But I said, I need all the lumber that's up behind the supply department. I need to get some cement from the Corps of Engineers. I said, but I redraw this thing and I can build you a theater. He said, what's the bad news? That's that pile of stuff out there. I says, have a Saturday night weenie roast for the Army boy, burn it. And that's exactly what they did.
So this is bad lumber? Or?
No, it was piled up, and it was China, or Japanese kind of structure. And to figure it all out, I'd been there yet. So I had a captain assigned to me. We went over to the Corps of Engineers, and within 2 days I had a drafting board, T-squares paper, and drew up a new building and put all kinds of people to work within the company, and had Koreans pouring concrete. We did everything, and 4 months later, and this captain says, the only thing I want in that place is I want a platform I can talk to my boys from. So we had a slope floor in it, theater chairs, 35 millimeter camera, and 4 months later we showed the first movie and had an open house, and that was it. The next week he sent me to Japan for a R&R, to rest and recuperate, which I wasn't due yet, but because of the good work he sent me over there.
All right. Now, who were you? Tell me a little bit about the people you were working with there and building it and so forth. Who did you have to help you? Who was doing the work?
Well, I had whoever had free time, or whoever was told to work by their superior. I personally answered to the company commander and the first sergeant. And then there was a captain that was supposedly head of the repairs and utilities deal, but that first 4 months, that didn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. So the people that worked for me, I even had sergeants out there working at night, pounding nails.
Now, were you a PFC at this point, or just a private, or
I was a PFC at this point, yeah.
All right, so in a way, you're really in the position of being a boss despite the rank.
Yeah, right. I was fortunate to have that privilege, I guess, if you want to call it that, being that far away.
And then you had Korean laborers doing a lot of the actual work? Or?
No, it was mostly the GIs did it. Mm-hmm. We had some Korean laborers. Ultimately, I had 6 nationals working for me, and this was later down in the story. But they worked, and then they had some that came in, like we had people come in to run caterpillars and that big hole. Mm-hmm. They all had Koreans with them and stuff, and we had a few laborers that came. They just hired that carried concrete to dump it. You didn't have the convenience of dumping it where you wanted. You had to carry it there. But it was crude work, but it worked, and it came out good. So. And
while you were kind of there, did you see much of the civilian population in Korea?
We had a village right across the street. I don't know the name of it, but there was a settlement, I should say, probably. But our compound was an aircraft airport, actually. Mm-hmm. Runways, 2 different directions. 8th Army Aircraft Maintenance Division was the last Army Air Force aircraft unit. They had 3 helicopters and 3 fixed-wing small planes, and as they went out of commission, everything went to the Air Force. Right. So we were that was about the last group there, I think. I don't know how many years after I left they were there, but all these aircraft in Korea of the Army, helicopter stuff, came there for repair and maintenance. And then there was a division of people, there's 200 people that worked in various aspects to take care of that. And then repairs and utility things took care of the facilities. And then that's where I was assigned.
All right.
So
now, you're kind of taking us through. You built your theater. You go over to Japan for R&R. What was that experience like?
Oh, that was nice. That first one, I stayed went with another fellow from my base, of course, and we stayed at a resort up in Fuji Mountain area, and we had lakes and swimming, fishing, motorcycle riding, sightseeing, stuff like that. Didn't see much of Tokyo per se, the city life, except when we passed through there.
Right.
We got delayed getting back because of the aircraft. So we stayed at Tachikawa Air Force Base for a week, but they gave us passes that night, and that's when I probably got exposed to things for going out for dinner and stuff like that. That was the first trip. But after I came back from there, then I was assigned to the repair and utilities and picked up the duties because as Corporal Smith, he was cycling home. So they made me the boss. I guess they're in charge of that. And my buddy from Wisconsin was there already. And they occasionally put another GI in up there when they didn't know what to do with them. And half the time they were not the kind we wanted around, so we didn't keep them long. But at that point, I had 6 Koreans working for me. 3 carpenters, a painter, electrician, and a couple of guys that just were handy people. But they were good.
So you're largely kind of maintaining the facilities at the base? Yeah.
And then because of my background and the theater thing that went so well, I ended up building 4 complex officers' quarters, remodeled the NCO club, did the quarterly place where everybody goes in and signs in and stuff, remodeled that. My last task, I built a hangar for the airplanes leaving, and as I was leaving to Korea, I'm way ahead of the story here, but the ASCOM city part of the hospital and stuff where we shipped in and out was about 3/4 of a mile across a rice paddy from us, but you could see the base. And I was standing there watching. I was getting ready to get on the bus to go to Incheon to get on the boat and come home. I watched them lift the first truss up on top of that building. I was kind of glad I was getting out of there because I had no textbooks or nothing. It was all done by guessing my guys, but it worked.
So you didn't know if the roof was going to fall in or not?
No, but I knew it wasn't because there was one right next to it was made of Japanese design. So I crawled around there and measured it up and got all the stuff from there. So it went all right. But in that period of time over there, that my job was to look at things and make sure they was fixed. And of course, you always tried to send a Korean to do it if you could, because I wasn't mechanically inclined. And somebody's stove broke, I sent a Korean to fix it. Somebody had to have a light bulb changed, I sent a Korean to fix it. So that's what they were there for. And they were nice people. In fact, the one even invited us to his house out, and that was an experience because then you got to eat some of the native foods and stuff, which they told you never to do, but when you trust a guy, he ain't going to make his boss sick. So, so that was an experience, and that was enjoyable. So.
And what kind of home did he have? When was it?
Probably about 25-foot square, maybe, and dirt floor, and in a cooking area, and then they had a hardwood area, which was their dining. Of course, you sat on the floor, barefooted. And they had the sleeping quarters and stuff, but it's kind of like a one-room area. But he was probably middle class at that time. Right. Yeah.
In general, what kind of attitude did the Koreans seem to have toward Americans at this point?
Oh, gimme. They expected us to do everything for them. Across the street from us, down the road a little ways, there was a factory built. It was just finished when I got there. 14 months later, it's still empty. Koreans were still waiting for the United States to put equipment in it so they could run it. So it was at that point, we're looking now 50 years ago or better, they were still coming out of the war or the conflict, and so they were looking at the United States to do a lot. And of course you had the black market and all that going on, GIs and stuff. So. But the people pretty well respected you. You was safe to go out. I had to travel to Seoul once a week for supplies and pick up the movies. And I drove a lot of times by myself in a Jeep or a truck, and I had no worry.
What physical condition was Seoul in at that point? Was it rebuilding? Or?
It was rebuilding, yeah. When the Olympics was around 12 years ago, and then that's when I could see it again on TV, and nothing like it was when I was there. So. But it was an interesting town. And then I got up on the 7th Division area, which is up by the DMZ. Went up there trading for materials and did my horse trading up there. So I saw quite a bit of the country.
Okay. Now, what was sort of the atmosphere like in terms of concerns about conflict, or how did you have a sense that there was still much shooting going on? I mean, in principle, the armistice is in place, and no one's shooting at each other. But what were things like? I mean, were people worried about being attacked or sniped at or anything like that?
Not where I was at. When you go up north by the DMZ, yeah, that's a little different because you could see your enemy across the way. And there was some exchange of fire there once in a while. But most of the people, going back, another fellow from Byron Center here was in the Air Force, and he was stationed in the Air Force Base by Seoul. And we got together several times. And but none of us carried, when we went between places, carried a weapon.
Right.
We had weapons assigned to us, but mine sat on the rack all the time until I had to fire it because I had to requalify or something. But no, it was pretty safe to go around. And in the towns, there was places that you better not go into because of not so much of the danger of getting shot, but robbed,
right.
Beat up, maybe, for that type of thing. So you stayed away from those places, and you pretty well knew where to go and where not to go.
But that's mostly a question of kind of dealing with sort of local criminal elements and things like that, rather than any political issues or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, it was just the way society was.
Yeah. But you weren't
that bad right here.
you weren't in a situation where you were wondering, were the North Koreans or the Chinese were ever going to attack or anything like that? Are we going to have the war start up? By then, it's quieted down enough that it's sort of business as usual on some level.
Yeah. In fact, one of my executive vice presidents of my company at the time, when I was home for a while, he was in the conflict itself, and he used to tell about his war stories. And I used to listen to him, and I says, well, you came home, and I had to go back and finish up what you didn't get done.
Right.
So it basically was making the peace treaty work. Mm-hmm. We were there to help build, and the stuff we did was all contributing to their restructuring, I would say. Even though I didn't have that much of a hands-on with that, that's what the other guys did, and we took care of the equipment for them to do that. So.
Right. Now, how long were you in Korea?
I was 16 months port to port, and so I was in Korea about 14, 15 months, I guess, with a ship flying. I don't know. Going over, it took quite a while because we ran into a hurricane. Coming home, we had a major's wife was sick with cancer, so that ship moved pretty fast.
You ran into a hurricane on your way over?
Tail end of the hurricane, yeah. We dropped down by Hawaii and went across around the south end of Okinawa, stopped at Okinawa. But in just, maybe 400 miles from Okinawa, we hit the tail end of a hurricane, and pretty rough. When you can't see the sea when you're sitting on the deck of the ship, and then all of a sudden the water comes over, it's pretty rough.
All right. Okay, now after you come back then from Korea, then at that point, what do you do?
Well, there was at that time, if you came back from overseas and had less than 90 days, you were supposed to be discharged. My duty was 2 active reserve, and 4 inactive, which they changed. But so I was technically to get out. I was going to land with 88 days left. We were out, probably about 2 days from shore, and they announced that there was a conflict developing in Laos at that time, and that everybody would be reassigned closest to their point of drafting or assignment. So I was assigned to Fort Sheldon near Chicago, north of Chicago.
Fort Sheridan?
Sheridan. Fort Sheridan, excuse me. And so I was reassigned there. So when I hit the States, again, I was in charge of a group of guys to get signed out. So I was the last one on the plane. And in fact, it was overnight, and I had to take an extra day before I got back. Got home, of course, came home and leave first. Then went back and reported at Fort Sheridan. And it was just putting in your time there and keep you busy. They assigned me to the laundry. And when I got through with the time I had for leave time, I think I worked actively probably 14 days out of 90 or 88. I always took advantage of the leave time. So, but anyway, that's where I was. And then in November, I got released. Came back home, took the maximum time to get into the active reserve. I went back to work, and my work then I ended up doing a couple of shopping centers in Iowa. So I was out of town, and luckily I was out of town the days I was supposed to be at the reserve meeting, so I always asked for permission to leave. They have to grant that because of the job. In about a year, the captain down there said to me, why don't you get out of this thing? He says, you're never around when you're needed anyway. I says, what do I need is a letter from your boss. So I got the letter, and the next week I handed it to him at 7 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, I had the release paper. So I was out of the active reserve a year early. And then they put me in inactive reserve, and that changed my full discharge to 6 years instead of 8. So I got out in 62 instead of 64.
So your total time for about active duty then would be about how much?
Active duty was 2 years,
Okay.
and active reserve was 1, and I had 3 years of inactive. That it turned out.
All right. Now, did you ever complete the college degree?
No. That's another story, but I came back and went back to work, and the rules then is if you had a 5-year college degree in architecture, you worked 4 years and you was eligible to take the state board exams. If you didn't, you had to work 10 or go 10 years before you was eligible. Well, I came back and got going, and I wrote to a captain and a major that was my company commanders while I was in Korea, and told them I need a letter from them and give them the contents of what they had to say and where to send it. And they did, surprisingly, but they did. And the state allowed me to take my exam in 9 years, which was nice. Of course, I didn't make it the first year, so I still took 10, but we made it. So that's how I got to be registered architect and legally could practice the thing, and worked all over the United States and was in charge of people that was overseas and from the States in our business. So, yeah.
What do you think is sort of the biggest or flashiest or most impressive thing or most challenging thing that you designed?
What, privately or in the
private,
service?
Either way. I mean, overall.
Oh, I was my actual, after I developed into a position, I did commercial and industrial work. Started in the commercial work in 1965 with Woodland Mall right here in Grand Rapids. I was the project architect on that, and of course you have designers and engineers and all those kind of people. But I worked all over the country with shopping centers, and then the last project I retired from, it started in '72, was with Hudson's Department Store, which is now Macy's in the local area, but worked all over the country for them. Steelcase on 52nd Street was also a job that I was in charge of. So, yeah, they're around here. Those are the biggest ones. Of course, locally, the best one is Heritage Christian Reformed Church, west of town. I've been a member there, charter member, did that. And I've did several other buildings around, Township Hall, stuff. But other than the church, those are all through the company I worked for.
Right. Okay. To look back at things now, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you?
Oh, it instilled a discipline. I think that's what's lacking in our nation today is, we got too much, and people expect more. And that's why we're probably in the situation we're in today. I never agreed that the draft should ever have been taken away. I think young men need something like that to discipline themselves, to find themselves, and to be able to develop into whatever career God gave them to work. And I just think the Army or the military is one of those. My son went through it. He went to the academy. He made a career of the Air Force until the Clinton administration took so much money away from the military that he finally got out. And he was going to make a full career of it. He got out in 20. But I'm using him as an example of what's happened in our military strength in the last 20, 30 years.
Well, they did a lot of downsizing in that era, and so I've interviewed a number of people who were career officers, and at one point or another, you either don't make the next sort of rank jump or whatever, or you just don't have a place to go anymore, and so you get out.
Most of the time there's no money to get them there. And my son commented when we went into Boswell, I think it was, we're going to use all our artillery up there, and better not, we're sitting duck for anybody that's got the military, and we're still that way. Yeah. We're hand to mouth right now feeding our people in Iraq and Afghanistan or anywhere else. And it shouldn't be that way. And we hear the verbiage from the two running guys that they're going to take care of that, but we'll see.
Oh, it will take money. You have to rebuild and resupply and do a lot of things.
Put it in the wrong place, I think.
All right. Are there any other particular incidents or things from your time in the service or events or people that you tend to recall that you haven't mentioned here to us yet?
Well, I could tell you all kinds of events, but they ain't necessarily military. Well, they're military, but they're not constructive type things. It's things you bump into when you have a disagreement with majors or captains and stuff. And it's kind of funny. I'll tell you one story. When I was in charge of the RNU in Korea, the saluting of officers and that coat of arms type of thing kind of goes away because, I mean, there's enough stress there just to be there. And so the officers don't always push that onto you. They expect respect, and you get that, but you don't have to salute and all that stuff. So anyway, my buddy and I were sitting there on the workbench one day, and Koreans were putzing around doing their thing, and the door opened. The major came in with a first lieutenant behind him. And you could tell this particular person probably was a rather large person when he come into the Army, and they took the weight off of him and forgot to reissue him new clothes because they kind of hung funny. But anyway, he came in there and introduced this lieutenant because he was assigned to this division. And we kind of didn't get off the bench and stuff. And this major, he came over and introduced us. And I stood up and shook the guy's hand and said, it's salute him and call him sir and all that kind of stuff, you know. And we talked and gave him a briefing what we did. They left. And I said to my buddy, I says, tomorrow morning that lieutenant's going to come in here and he's going to get after us. I said, because we didn't jump and yell attention when they walked in and all this stuff. So I said, here's what we're going to do. I called all the Koreans together. I says, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, you'll be in the shop, make all the noise you can, run the saws. As soon as that door opens, you start everything up and run. And I said, I'll be sitting at the desk, and my buddy, I said, you can do what you want. So sure enough, the door opened almost right on 8 o'clock, and then this lieutenant come walking in. And we all ignored him. It was noisy. He walked right up beside me, and I finally caught him, like I caught him on the corner of my eye, and I yelled to have everybody shut everything off, and it got dead silence. And he said, then he got on me about all this stuff. He said, I said, well, would you like to go to the first sergeant with me or this? We can talk to him. I says, the phone was right there. I says, I'll call him and see if he's available. We'll go down and talk to him about this. He says, yeah, I'd like to do that. I says, okay. And I put my hand on the phone. I said, well, would you do one thing for me before we go through with this? And he says, well, what's that? I says, go back out that door, shut it, and read the sign. Then come back in and we'll call the sergeant. He went out the door, surprisingly, shut the door, and it says, unauthorized personnel, keep out. Never did see him again. So that was a case of education and taking a guy who was wearing all the metal and thought it was important and all that stuff. But those kind of incidents do happen, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I tell the story a lot. I get a chuckle out of it.
Well, on the whole, or most of the officers and so forth that you dealt with, people who didn't worry about most of that most of the time?
They were most of them, this lieutenant, of course, is an exception, but he came around. He came around, didn't take very long. We had a major that was a little problem. In fact, he kept me from getting rank before I left Korea. But that was, you don't get rank, you can't eat rank anyway. I got it when I got here, so. Most of them were just as common as could be. They were there against their will, not against their will, but they didn't want to be there anymore. Anybody else wanted to be there, but they had a duty to serve their country, so they did it. And my captain that was in charge of us, their mess hall was right across the aisle from us. In fact, their hot water heater we had in our building. But Saturday night, we'd be knocking on the door, and here he'd come with a platter full of fried chicken. He says, hey, I know you got a little whiskey around here somewhere. He says, let's have some chicken. And, that's the guy. They come over and sat in our barracks with us and socialize with us. That was no problem.
I think that probably gives us a very good point here, unless you've got something else you want to throw in.
No, except... kind of a privilege to do this. I didn't know you guys were doing this type of thing, so.
Well, we're doing our best to get as complete a picture as we can of an experience that in American society is getting less and less common. Certainly when you grow up, and even to largely when I grew up, everybody had soldiers and stuff in the family, and veterans were all around.
Yeah,
and it's getting much, much less that way, and people often don't really understand what military life was like. And so on that level, it's important to do, but also it gives us an opportunity to collect a lot of individual stories and pull them all together so the future generations can go and see, okay, this is part of what it was like to be an American at that point in time.
Well, I had an easy time because I was in peacetime, and I'm sure those that went into conflict and war, of course, have all got different stories and
Certainly.
fears and stuff, but basically it was a good experience for me, other than, I was away from home, from real life, but that caught up real quick, and so that was good. So.
Well, thank you for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
There we go.
Fantastic.
That's right. Yeah.
Mike's for you.
Okay. All right. Well, now Patrick will kind of eventually this turns into something you broadcast on BCTV, and then when he gets that sort of together, then we supply DVD copies